Hello, my name is Annie Rogers, and on behalf of the ADDitude team, I am pleased to welcome you to today's ADHD Experts presentation titled Back to School Toolkit, Proven Systems for Solving Disorganization, Procrastination, and Missed Deadlines. Leading today's presentation is Anne Dolin. Anne Dolin has 30 years of experience working with students. She is a former public school special education teacher and author who founded Educational Connections in 1998. The company specializes in helping students, especially those with ADHD, build executive function skills and study habits to perform better in school and ultimately in college. Anne is also past president of CHAD of Northern Virginia. In today's webinar, we will explore how to help students with ADHD get organized, turn in assignments on time, overcome procrastination, and stay motivated. Anne will share expert advice and practical strategies to support your student this year. We'll cover the power of sustainable systems, including how to effectively use a calendar and planner. We will also discuss types of procrastination, easy to implement organizational routines, and ways to foster open communication. On that note, we would love to begin today's webinar by asking a few poll questions to our live audience. Please tell us, what is your top priority or goal for your child this school year? And secondly, how would you describe your child or student with ADHD using some of the terminology that you will see in this presentation today? Please select your answers, and you can comment at any time in the text box under the video player to tell us more. For answers to common webinar questions about slides, transcripts, and certificates of attendance, click on the FAQ tab of your webinar screen. If you haven't done so already, we encourage you to visit attitudemag.com/subscribe and sign up for ADDitude magazine for yourself or to share with a teacher or a loved one who could benefit from greater ADHD understanding. Just click the magazine tab on your screen to learn more. And finally, the sponsor of this webinar is Ironshore. Ironshore is a pharmaceutical company committed to the development and commercialization of innovative medicines that treat diseases of the central nervous system and meaningfully improve the lives of patients and caregivers. To learn more about a treatment option for people 6 years and older, go to ironshoretreatment.com. This webinar was supported by Ironshore. Ironshore had no influence on speaker selection or webinar content. So without any further ado, I'm so pleased to welcome Anne Dolin. Anne, thank you so much for joining us today and for leading this discussion and providing these strategies in this back to school season.
Well, thank you, Annie. It's great to be here, as always. And to all the parents and guardians out there, welcome. You're here today because you care a lot for your kids. I mean, you're taking a whole hour out of your afternoon to ensure that this school year is better than all the others. But you may also be here because you've tried a lot of things in the past. You may have tried the #1 hack, the very best solution, or the ultimate tip, and none of those things worked. In this year, you want sustainable systems to take you and your child through the school year. But you might also be thinking, I'm worried. I'm worried this year is going to be more of the same. I'm worried I'm going to be the homework police yet again, poking and prodding and nagging and cajoling, doing anything I can to get my kids to focus and finish. You may also be thinking, I'm worried I'll be driving at the last minute to get poster board for the project that's due tomorrow. Or I'm worried it won't be too long until the teacher starts sending me messages about missing assignments. But let's just take a second and think that this year could be different. Imagine that this year is different. Your kids know what's due and when it's due. They submit their work on time. They can find their materials without scrambling. And it's all possible if you have the right toolkit of systems in place. I know this to be true. For 26 years, our coaches here at Educational Connections have been helping kids with ADHD to improve their executive function skills. And it's important work because ADHD manifests itself as difficulty with executive functions, such as organization, planning ahead, and starting on time. And we know that we can bolster these skills. We cannot fix them, but we can develop processes around them to make life better. And it is the value of regular processes that make a difference, systems, if you will, instead of quick fixes. So let's start with that first executive function skill I mentioned, organization. You know, at this time of year, everybody's pretty organized. You probably took your kids to Target and you had that fun trip and everybody stocked up on school supplies. Your child might have a new backpack. They have beautiful folders and they even have some really nice color-coded ones. But I want you to think back to last year, maybe 2 or 3 months into school. What did your child's backpack look like if you were able to get a glance of it? It probably had tons of papers crumpled up at the bottom, and papers that weren't at the bottom were sticking out every which way from the binder. And all those lovely color-coded folders you got at the beginning of the school year, well, they went unused. So we want to stop that from happening this year, that's for sure. So one thing that's helpful at the beginning of the year when it comes to organization is certainly setting up the child's study space to make sure that they have a place conducive for learning, that they can get their homework done. But I would argue, maybe even more importantly, is getting that space optimized for focus. So at this time of year, when we help students with that, we want to help them uncover, what helps my focus and what actually hurts it? But in order to do this, it can't be what we say or what you say as a parent. We need to get feedback from kids. It's actually something we call metacognition. It's helping students develop self-awareness. So we use this tool called the Focus Finder. And by the way, this tool, along with others that I'm going to share with you today, I've put them all in one place. So you just click on it one time or go to the site once and you can find everything there. And you can download the Focus Finder at ectutoring.com/ADDitude, ADDitude. So if you're able to see the slide, you might just be listening. So I'll kind of describe it for you. On this Focus Finder, you're going to see lots of things that can help or hinder focus, like, do bright lights help you? What about soft music in the background? No music at all. How about your phone? Is it better if it's in airplane mode or on the other side of the room? And then interactively, because we do our work online with students, and there's just a lot going on because it's always screen sharing, and we bring up this tool, the Focus Finder, and we'll mark it up with kids, and we'll have them move, the words that help their focus into helps my focus, and the ones that don't into hurts my focus. So it is through this discussion that gets the ideas flowing that kids are able to say, this actually helps me, but this is not conducive to my focus. And I will say it is very different for every student. Some kids, are super self-aware, and other kids need help in this direction. So certainly getting organized, creating understanding where your focus lies, and staying organized is all really important. The other part of organization isn't just things, but it's also work that has to be done. So we're always working with kids and checking in to make sure at the beginning of the session that their organization hasn't gone by the wayside. Because when it does, if you let it go for too long, then a month later, when everything's a mess, it's just like you're starting all over, and we want to prevent that. So we'll touch base on their organization, and we'll help them to break down big assignments, which I'll talk about later. But when it comes to your family at home, another way you can stay organized is through the clean sweep. This is the family strategy. So put aside 20 minutes of time once a week. And during this time, everybody's getting in on the act of organizing something. So for your kids, oh, and by the way, make it fun. Maybe play some loud music in the background to get everybody pumped up and energized. So for kids, especially older ones, they might be organizing their digital documents on their laptop. For other students, it could be cleaning out their backpack or sorting through and filing the papers in their binder. It could be tidying up the study space. For you, it might be cleaning out that junk drawer. But the idea is that everybody's in on it, not just your student with ADHD. And you always want to habit stack it. Habit stacking means that you want to take something new you're doing and pair it with something that you already do, because that way you don't have to remember this one more thing. It just kind of becomes a natural flow. So if you have dinner together Sunday night, habit stack the clean sweep right after that. So we also want to help kids stay organized by thinking ahead. As I mentioned, we're always working with kids on breaking down assignments and looking ahead, not just what do you have tomorrow, but what's due at the end of the week. And at home, a family strategy is helping your kids think ahead by getting ready the night before. This is called the launching pad. So the launching pad is really simple. It's just a bin, a box. It's some container that goes by the door from which the child is going to exit in the morning. In my house, when my kids were younger, it was the way our house was set up. You couldn't see that door. So, and on our kitchen island, one had one end of the island and the other had the other. And that's where they put their things. So it's kind of different for every family. But the idea is you need a place to put your stuff. So at night, kids will put their binder, their backpack, their musical instruments, their sports equipment. So the next morning, they launch into a new day in an organized fashion. And there's a lot less scurrying around. You can habit stack this to something you already do. Maybe it's right before your kids go to bed, or right after dinner, or right when they get home from their sports practice. What I've found over the years is that parents can help a lot with routines like the launching pad, perhaps even having a calendar on the refrigerator with all the extracurriculars week by week, not month. That's a little bit too long, where kids are going to go after school. So these types of things can make a difference. Things that have to do with routine, parents tend to do pretty well with, especially if they get a benefit from it. And we'll talk a little bit about that later if you have ADHD too. So parents can absolutely help with routines, but some of the harder other things like teaching learning strategies, sometimes those are better outsourced, only if you feel like there's a lot of tension between you and your child. And if habit formation is of interest to you, like it is to me, our coach, Rachel, created this ebook, and she's amazing. And I love this ebook. It's called Get Into the Habit with Your Kids, 3 simple ways to create new habits and strengthen old ones. And you can get this also by going to the same URL I mentioned, ectutoring.com/ADDitude. All right, so we talked about organization, we talked about setting up focus, and we talked about things to keep going with organization, like the launching pad. But let's talk a little bit about prioritization, because this is often really hard for kids with ADHD. Sometimes when we say to kids, time management, they have no idea what we're talking about. They really don't. And I found that it's much better for kids if we explain things with visuals. So for that reason, I'm going to show you what we show the kids. If you're able to see this slide, you see that there's 3 glass jars. And the first one is sand, and it's filled about 3/4 of the way up. The next one has the sand plus some pebbles. It's almost to the top. And then the last one has the sand, the pebbles, and then it has some rocks. But unfortunately, not everything fits in this jar. So we say to the kids, okay, let's pretend that the sand is the stuff that you really like to do, like scrolling through your phone, watching a show on Netflix. The pebbles are the things that you really should do, like your math homework. Yeah, you should get it done. It's not graded, but it's pretty important for doing it because it helps you to do better on the test. And the last one, this is the rocks. The rocks are actually super important because they count for a lot of your grade too. Maybe you have a big essay that's coming up. Might not be due the next day, but it counts for 25% of your grade. This is what often happens. Kids, as I've showed you, they put the sand first, followed by the pebbles and then the rocks, and not everything fits. But what if you reverse it? This is a graphic of effective prioritization. What if you put the rocks first, followed by the pebbles and then the sand? Oh my gosh, look, everything fits in this jar. It's amazing. And showing kids this and talking through it and saying, actually, you're going to do the same amount of work, actually maybe even a little bit less because you're more alert earlier and you probably get it done faster, only if you put the rocks first. So if you put the rocks first, then the pebbles, then the sand, it makes life so much easier. And then they start to get it. So here's how it works. When we are helping kids, we always want to check in at first. How did your week go? How are you feeling about things? Maybe touch base on organization, as I mentioned. But then we want to help kids prioritize the work. Okay, let's take a look at your LMS. That stands for Learning Management System. It's different in every school district. Some school districts use Google Classroom, some use Canvas, some use Schoology. It doesn't really matter what it is, but the idea is we want kids to show us, say, okay, open up Schoology, let's take a look at your calendar so we can see what they have, what's due. And then we talk about, all right, what are your rocks and what are your pebbles? And then we help them to schedule on their calendar what they're going to do. You know, what are the rocks you got to get done? What are your pebbles? And by the way, this is so important, and we often don't think of this as parents. Kids need sand. They need to schedule their downtime too. So now we've answered for kids a very powerful question. What do you have and when will you do it? It's all laid out. And then we'll help them to tackle the most dreaded assignment, the thing that they don't want to do. Because if we can give them strategies for starting something that's hard, they can use that when they're on their own later on. And then lastly, I'll say one thing that trips up a lot of kids with ADHD is that they do not anticipate obstacles. They're usually very, very optimistic. You might have a kid like this in your house. Mom, don't worry. I totally get it. I'm absolutely going to get this done on time. But then something happens they don't think about. A sports banquet. The coach scheduled another practice. They forgot they have to go with you to take a sibling to the dentist. So all these things can happen that can get in the way. And we want to make sure that kids know if they get in this situation, what are they going to do? So we help them think through that before it actually happens. And it looks like this. So all kids, when they log into their learning management, I shouldn't say all, most, when they log onto their learning management, when the teachers put in assignments, they populate into a calendar in most cases, and it will look something like this. So we have kids pull this up, but then we say, okay, let's go deeper. And we want them to click on their subjects and say, for example, this one, English. Let's take a look at your English. You mentioned you have this essay due on Friday. Is there a rubric that goes along with it? Let's take a look at that rubric to understand the expectations for this assignment. And then you can take that big assignment and break it down into smaller chunks. So you might be thinking, where does that go? You know, where is the best place for my child to write down what they have to do, whether it's a big assignment or these smaller chunks? And I will say it's different for every student. Some kids will use Google Calendar. Some kids will actually use, a good old-fashioned paper and pencil calendar, an assignment notebook. Some kids really just don't want to go in that direction and they won't do it. In those kids, we found success with allowing them to use a daily list. They just have to write it down. It doesn't really matter how, but they just need a system to sustain it. The other thing that's helpful is to help kids understand how long something will take. And often this is really hard for students. So this is another tool. We have hundreds of them in our executive function program, and it's a time estimator tool. And so before we say something like, well, let's say, see, Susie, how long do you think it will take you to do that essay? They don't know at first. So we'll start with something fun and easy. Okay, how long do you think it will take you to write the alphabet backwards? And you can see from this tool here that the student will say, oh, I don't know, like 30 minutes. And then we'll time them. Inevitably, it's usually at least 2 or 3 times as much time. In this case, 2 minutes. Oh, how long do you think it will take to do 10 jumping jacks? Oh, okay, let me jot that down. Let me time you. So these things are fun just to get kids thinking about how long something takes, but you can't stop there. Then you have to say, okay, great, but let's talk about that math assignment. How long do you think it will take you to do that? And then we'll put them to work. So they have that action item of they tell us what they think it will be, 20 minutes. We'll jot that down. Then we'll say, okay, I want you to time yourself while you're doing this. And when you come back in the next session, let's talk about it and discuss it. So the value in these types of things isn't necessarily like this tool itself, but it's also the discussion coming around it. And so often we assume that kids know this, and they don't, because they overestimate how much time they have, and they underestimate how long it's going to take them to do something. But if they can get this skill down, it's so essential. It doesn't just help them in K-12. It helps them in college. It helps them when they have a job. All these things make life easier. So we talk a little bit about organization. We've talked about focus. We talked about prioritizing and understanding rocks, pebbles, and sand. Let's talk about procrastination, just getting started on something that you have to do. You know, when it comes to procrastination, there's 2 kinds. There are functional procrastinators and there are dysfunctional procrastinators. So functional procrastinators are the kids that they get an assignment on Tuesday. It's due on Friday. They wait until Thursday night, but they're able to focus well enough to get it done. They put their nose to the grind and they somehow are able to finish it and they turn it in. And although it may not be the best product because they've waited until the last minute and they're under the gun, they still get it in. So you as a parent may not know about it. And the teacher doesn't because it's turned in on time. Here's the dysfunctional procrastinator. Same assignment, starts Thursday night, but this kid can't focus well enough to get it done. So it's often not done at all because it's been avoided. It's done partially, but it's not turned in. And now everybody knows. You probably see the stress at home. The teacher absolutely knows because it's not turned in. And it is this dysfunctional procrastination that has the most impact on grades. The problem is with functional kids is as work gets harder and as assignments become more complex, they're not just due the next day, but they take multiple days to do. Functional can evolve into dysfunctional, and we want to break that cycle. So one thing we do with kids, and when a coach works with a student that procrastinates, we start by giving them a quiz. This is a 12-question quiz, and it's on the same link I mentioned, ectutoring.com/ADDitude. And it's so fun to do. I've done it myself. I've done it with my kids. We do it with our students when our coaches work with kids. And it's an informal assessment, but it helps understand why the student is procrastinating, because it's not all for the same reason. Like as parents, we assume, oh, you just don't want to do the work. But actually, that's not typically the case. So the quiz helps kids determine their style, and there are 6 of them. And this is important because the approach we take with kids varies based on what we find from this little quiz. So I thought it would be helpful today in this webinar if I share with you the 6 styles, and then I just quickly touch base on some of the solutions for each style. So the first one is the crisis maker. This is the kid who always waits until the last minute. And they do this because they just can't muster the motivation to get started. And it becomes this learned habit because they get this dopamine spike that tells them, hey, this is not so bad. Look, you can do it. And it becomes almost to some degree like a pleasure chemical. And they keep doing it like that. So they don't know there's another way. So when this happens and kids can't muster the internal motivation to get started, we have to help them with external accountability. So it could be an accountability partner. It could be the student's coach. It could be another student in the class. Hey, Mary, want to work on the study guide? How about tomorrow at 4:00? That's a form of accountability. It's the use of a timer, which I'm going to share with you in a second. And it's also, is the place you're working the most conducive for your focus? Did you do the focus finder? Do you know what that looks like? And if that's not working for you, maybe it's outside of the house at Starbucks or the library after school. So let's talk about timers. I love timers. I think they're probably the most undervalued and cheapest tool that helps kids. I think that a timer that's physical is probably better than a timer on the phone because, it's easy to go down the rabbit hole of checking your text messages and doing other things. But the reason timers are helpful is when you don't have that internal oomph to get started, the timer says, okay, this is for a short period of time. Let's go. So you have to set it for a short amount of time, say 10 minutes. I'm going to set the timer. I'm going to get rid of all my distractions and I'm going to work hard just for this 10 minutes and I can take a break. Usually kids can keep going. Or for older kids, it's Pomodoro. The Pomodoro technique was actually created by a researcher in the 80s from Italy, and he was Italian. And he found that when students working alone that needed to focus, older kids, they set the timer for 25 minutes. That was really their sweet spot. So kids get rid of their distraction, set the timer for 20 minutes, called the Pomodoro technique, and they work as hard as they can, take a 5-minute break, and if they're able, they can set it again. Timers help kids feel successful because they've accomplished something in a short amount of time. But again, kind of like the focus finder and the estimating time tool, it can't be like, hey, honey, come over here. I was on this webinar and the lady said to use a timer. It doesn't work like that with kids because there has to be discussion around it. So in our sessions, we'll say, hey, let's see if this works for you. It might not. Let's try it out. And so we'll say, okay, let's take a look at this assignment. What if we set the timer for 10 minutes and during that time, you got rid of all your distractions and you worked really hard to get this done, focusing as much as you can. Let's see how that goes. And let's talk about it afterwards. How did that feel? How did it work for you? Did you feel productive? Did you actually work at a faster pace because it was a short amount of time? Were you feeling successful? So that's the discussion around it. And it has to be practiced over time, especially as work gets harder. So those are the crisis makers. Here's the Defier. The Defier has difficulty with authority. You may have one in your house. They may like one teacher and they cannot stand another teacher. They're really personality specific. And when that happens, they may not want to do the work for the other teacher. So helping them to understand somebody else's perspective by asking powerful questions, I'll share that with you in just a second, is really important. So is autonomy for Defiers. They do not like to be told what to do. They don't want to be told, hey, you better do this right now. But instead, hey, you mentioned this assignment. What would be a good time to get started on this? And for Defiers, they absolutely have to have sand. They need sand. They need a built-in procrastination block where they have autonomy to do what they want during that time. Another strategy, I mentioned it before, is saying to a student, hey, I don't know. this might work for you, but it might not. What do you think? And often because sometimes kids that are defiers in sessions, the minute you say that, they're like, oh, what is it? Suddenly they're interested. But if you say, I want you to do this, they won't have anything to do with it. Sometimes it's in the delivery. So powerful questions. Okay, let's say here's a situation. A paper due on Friday, rough draft due on Wednesday. And the student says, this is stupid. Why do I have to turn in a rough draft? I don't need that. I'm just going to turn it in on Friday, the final copy. So we ask, could your teacher's feedback on your rough draft be helpful in getting the grade you want? Tell me about that. How might that be the case? So again, just having a discussion. It helps kids to think differently and to understand the teacher's perspective. So here's the Over-Doer. This tends not to affect young kids, but as kids get older, it does. These are students and adults, you might know some, that are people pleasers, and they have a hard time saying no. So for these students, we absolutely help them to prioritize their own rocks first. Often they will do things for other people and they'll agree to do things. And so when they get to their own work, it's late at night and it's not a good situation. So instead of, yeah, I'll do that, you say, let me think on that. Or could you try, can I get back to you? For group projects, where this often happens, we help kids understand it is okay to delegate tasks. You can say, hey, Sarah, I know how much you love research. This seems like a good part of the project for you. What do you think? And then we have the dreamers. These kids assume everything will work out. They're pretty laid back and they don't love details. And they often know that they have this problem. So they try to self-correct. They don't like the feeling of, like, oh, it's going to be okay. Then, oh my gosh, it's not okay. And then they're scrambling. So what often happens is they say to themselves, you know what? I don't want to feel like that anymore. I'm going to start on it right away this time. So they start on it, but then they don't do anything else until it's due, until right before it's due. So again, they start out strong, but don't have follow through. And it's almost like a sense of time blindness in a lot of these students. So we want them to consider the details, which are hard for them. And we do this through backwards planning, having actionable steps along the way. There's also something called body doubling. Hey, you do this for 5 minutes. I'm going to do this other thing for 5 minutes, just so we're both doing the same thing and you're more likely to get your work done. Also, Pomodoro works great for dreamers. Okay, when you created your action steps, let's use a timer. And then again, having that discussion. How did you feel when the timer went off? Were you successful? If not, let's tweak it. And then our last two types have to do with stress and anxiety. So here's the first one. It's called the Worrier. The Worrier is a student who is extremely anxious and stressed, but they don't have great executive function skills. Some Worriers actually, they want control so much that they're able to put it in gear and get the work done. But this type of Worrier, they have all this anxiety, but they also don't have great executive function skills. And what we help them to do first is when you need to tackle something and you're so worried about it and you're thinking, I'm just going to do it later when I feel better, which by the way doesn't happen. Before we go there, we want the student to do a brain dump. There's research that shows if you jot down your worries, it helps you to free up your frontal lobe. And so because we work with kids virtually and because we do tons of screen shares and we have lots of tools to help students, we'll do this with them where either on the interactive whiteboard, they'll write down their worries, or we have Jamboard or Miro will they'll make stickies and move their stickies around. But they're getting everything out. For example, I've got another midterm on Friday. If I don't get at least an 85, I'm not going to get a B for the semester. I really don't want to disappoint my parents. I have so much stuff to do this week and I have practice every day. There was a study done at University of Chicago and the researchers looked at students who had to take a test. And the kids that were super anxious, they taught them to do the brain dump. And then they compare their performance to their non-anxious peers. Because typically when you're anxious, it totally affects your ability to do well. Turns out when they did the brain dump, they performed just as well as their non-anxious peers. So we know that helping kids free up their frontal lobe is helpful. Teaching kids to prioritize their rocks, again, breaking those big rocks into manageable pieces so it doesn't feel overwhelming. And for these students, sometimes they don't do great with a timer. Sometimes there are kids that need to break things down in another way. And there's two ways you can break time down. You can break it down or break a task down with time or with task. So for example, I'm going to do these 5 math problems, take a break, and then do the next 5. That's breaking something down by task. And then our last one is a perfectionist. They want everything to be perfect. And so they won't do it and they procrastinate because they're afraid it won't be just so. So the value in helping perfectionists comes before they actually start the assignment. If they're in the middle of it, and you may have found as a parent, you're trying to say, it's fine, just turn it in. You're okay, stop worrying. None of that stuff works. It has to be before they start. Okay, when we work with students, we'll say, all right, Sam, let's have an agreement. Will you submit this today? Yes, I will submit this. Okay. What would be a good amount of time to do this? Again, going back to the time estimation skills. All right, let's give yourself a limit, a time limit. What time will that be? 7:30? Okay, great. And then let's determine what's good enough. Maybe it doesn't have to be technically correct through the entire paper. Is 80% okay? Because for many kids, 80% is the new 100. And the idea is you just need to turn it in. Now, when we have the worriers or the kids that are perfectionists, there's a strategy that works so well with them. It's called if-then. And it's basically a reward using self-talk for yourself. So you say to yourself, as an example, if I finish this math homework, then I can go to dinner with my friends and not have it hanging over my shoulders. I was talking to one of our students. I know his family, his mom, and she called our office for him I think it was December or January, because he had just finished his first semester in college and it did not go well. He spent tons of time on sand, but nothing else. And his grades were very poor. And he had so much structure in high school that, he just wasn't used to what it was going to be like in college. And so we determined who would be the best coach for him. And it turns out it was Suzanne, and she's awesome. She specializes in college kids. So she starts working with him. And what they realized is that when he went to class and then went back to his dorm, he got very little done because he was all about hanging out with his friends, and it was very hard for him to motivate himself. So they set up an if-then. If I stay at the student union, sometimes it was the library, and I get these 2 rocks and this pebble done, then I can go back to my dorm room and hang around with my friends. So that's if-then. I'm wondering if you relate to any of these styles, or your child, the dreamer, the defier, the crisis maker, the worrier, the perfectionist, the over-doer. I know I do. And I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but both my kids have ADHD and I do as well. And so I see myself, and I absolutely see my kids in a few of these styles. The good news is that there are ways. We can't always fix them, but we can absolutely support them and get around them to make life definitely easier. Now, on that note, there is an elephant in the room. And some of you might be thinking, okay, these are great strategies for somebody else, but you don't know my kid. My kid is so difficult. I try to help him and he wants nothing to do with me. My kid is so resistant. You don't understand. I'm wondering if anybody out there feels like this. And it is so perfectly normal. We hear that all the time. When parents call our office looking for help, it's like we hear it 80% of the time. And the reason is that when anybody wants to change a behavior, or when they need to change a behavior, they're somewhere on the ladder of the stages of change. And if you're able to see this slide, you see that there's 5 steps. And when you don't want to change something, you're at the very bottom, at the pre-contemplation. No way, I can't and I won't change. But if maybe you're willing to try it because you see the problem, you might be at the preparation stage. So everybody starts at a different place, right? It's so common. I mentioned this college student. I had another call from a parent. This was, I think it was last year, but it stuck out to me because she was a therapist. She is a therapist. And so she has a lot of tools to help her own child. But what happened was her son in ninth grade had missed some school because he was sick. And when he went back, he went into total avoidance mode. He had so much work to make up that he just did nothing at all. And she said, you know what? His problem is all with organization. If he just had a spreadsheet and if he could just figure out what all the things are he needs to do and then know all the due dates and then figure out what percentage of a grade is important so he can prioritize it, then everything would be okay. The kid would not at all listen to her. So I talked to her, I get all the information, and every morning in my company, we have a huddle at 10 o'clock. And we talk about the students on our caseload that we're working with, that we talk to the parents. And I brought up the student and I said, okay, here's the situation. And we brainstormed who would be the best coach for him. And it turns out that Jan, we thought Jan would be amazing for this student because she's good with kids like this. So Jan starts working with him, and we have this survey that we use for students when they have difficulty with change. And we figured out just from the survey that he was not going to receive help with organization, but he was willing to start some of his overdue assignments, especially in science. He was at the preparation stage. So that's where we started. Eventually, we backdoored it to the organization, but not until we built trust and not until he saw success. And that's often how it goes with resistant kids. So sometimes people ask, how does that work? And we have a 4-step system for virtual coaching. We check in, touch base on progress, figure out what's due, put it on a calendar or a list. And we want to be the safety net for parents so that they understand, so that they know that we've got it covered. We know what's due, and we're making sure that the student has them in. Help the student tackle the most dreaded assignments, and of course, anticipate obstacles. All this to say, you don't have to go it alone. There is help out there. We're happy to help. There's help at school. There are resources for kids that are struggling with these things. But if we can be of assistance to you, I invite you to scan this QR code. You can go to our website and learn about executive functions. We have a tab for ADHD and executive functions at ectutoring.com. And you can schedule a call, and we'll talk to you about your child's history, their needs, and help you to plan a path forward and see if what we do could be helpful to your family. So Kathy, Jennifer, and Ann Stewart all specialize in working with families with kids with ADHD. So on that note, Annie, I would love to turn it over to you and go to Q&A.
Amazing, Anne. Thank you so much. My notebook is full of strategies for the coming year. So thank you for these resources and for the hope for a great new year ahead. So as we head into the Q&A, I want to turn back to the question that we asked at the outset. We asked 2, and the first one was, what is your top priority or goal for your child this year? And the top 3 answers are telling. So number 1 was to get and stay organized. So clearly you are in the right place. Number 2 was reducing stress around assignments, with about 23%. And number 3 was more structure around your routines, at about 12%. So that's helpful as we head into the Q&A. We'll make sure to focus on those areas. And then we asked about how you would describe your child. And the breakout was interesting. I thought that really neck and neck, the top 3 were worriers, defiers, and dreamers. So I want to start out with a question we received a lot of, and that is, what if your child is all 3 of those things, or some other combination? How, as a parent, can I strategically choose where to begin?
Well, there's a couple things you can do. First, you can get the quiz and do it with your child. You do it and they do it. Just don't sit there while they do it. But I like the quiz because it's kind of a jumping off point to say, oh, you mentioned, Worrier. Let's talk about that. And you have a discussion around it. And really, our goal as parents and coaches is not to judge the student, because that's kind of when kids break away from us and they don't want to talk or they push back. And so if we can have a genuine conversation, really trying to uncover, tell me about that. How does that make you feel? When you mentioned that, tell me a little bit more about the feelings behind it. And all you're doing is having a conversation. We don't have to solve their problems in the initial conversation. Even if we just find out like you're a worrier, and we may not have realized that before because they look like a dreamer, for example, it gives us more information. The other thing I would say is you can also ask your child this question. Think back to last year. What was the thing that kept you up most at night? What was the thing that impacted your child the most? And just pick that one thing. And then hopefully with some of the strategies I gave you today, think about what's the one strategy I can use that could make a difference. And really working with your child around just that one thing over time and seeing if that can make a difference. Often when we're feeling overwhelmed as parents by things, we're like, oh, I'm never going to get out of this situation. It's easy to just check out or try too many things. And instead, try to get to the root of it. Why is this happening? What's the biggest obstacle? And maybe just plan one strategy around it.
Right. Start with those rocks, right?
Yes.
Okay. So we have found at ADDitude that sometimes a student who looks to be apathetic or defiant, even a worrier, that what is at the core is kind of a defense mechanism against past criticisms, past challenges that can add up. And I think that we got a question here that really gets to that from a parent who said that their child has just had a tough time over the years with repeated failure and bad outcomes. And she says they need to build evidence that they can succeed. Where can we start with this very big emotional / fear hurdle? I think it's a great question.
Yeah, it's such an important question. I guess the first thing I would ask is, what's behind it? Because it could be one of two things, or it could be two, or it could be both. So sometimes when kids are struggling in school, it's in particular classes like a math, a science, a foreign language. It's these courses that are cumulative. And when you get behind in a cumulative class like math, it's almost impossible to dig yourself out of it. It is so, so hard. You absolutely need help. You need to stay after school and meet with a teacher a couple times a week. You need a tutor. You need somebody to reteach you those concepts. Because having the expectation that you can fix this isn't going to work in cumulative classes. So that might be my first question is it just cumulative classes? Or is it that it's more of an executive function thing? And in that case, perhaps a coach or somebody else that can help the student see success would be helpful. So there are two different ways. So if it's the subject based, you would need a subject tutor. If it's maybe everything else, executive functions, you would likely need a coach, or you may need to work with your child in a different way, really just looking at the LMS with the student and saying, tell me what you have coming up, and helping them break down those things. I can personally relate to that. I mentioned that I have ADHD. I remember in middle school, I was in a pre-algebra class and looking up at the board and thinking this totally makes no sense to me. I just do not understand this. And I kept getting further and further behind. And that experience in math started to bleed into my other subjects. So it started out with a cumulative subject problem, But because I suffered so much negativity, it then became like, I cannot stand school at all. And I'm like now apathetic in all of my classes. And so often that's what happens with kids, and they do need outside help. And my mother was smart enough to get me a tutor in math, and that helped tremendously. And then I started to experience a little success in other classes, but it wasn't until I went to college and was able to do what I love, to study education and become a teacher, that, life turned around. And for many kids, it's like buoying them well enough with the support and through middle and high school to the point where they can go to college and major or get a job in that thing that they love, because they will be great adults. Often it's just supporting them through the journey to get there.
I love that story, Anne. That's so powerful, about how small steps can build the confidence needed to move forward. And I'm seeing definitely here in our Q&A that a lot of kids seem to be stuck. And I guess that leads to my next question. Here we are at the beginning of a new school year. It seems like a wonderful time to have a conversation with your child. We have a lot of what appear to be middle and high school, parents of middle and high school students here. Any tips for having a productive conversation with your child about their goals and getting their ideas and their buy-in, which we know is like critical to any system?
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up, Annie, because we just created these conversation cards for families for back to school, because like, it doesn't work if you say, oh, Mary, are you excited to go back to school? Like questions our parents asked, that is not conducive to conversations. But, you might even say, like, what are you most looking forward to? Or even it could be about the summer. What was the highlight of the summer? Is there somebody that you're looking forward to seeing this school year? So it doesn't have to be just about goal setting and academics. It can be, a general thoughtful conversation, really just to gain insight in how your child's feeling. Again, we don't have to solve their problems, but we want them to know we're good listeners and we're an ear for you and you can lean on us. We want to be there for you as parents. And that's important because as kids get into bigger issues that, outside of academics, we want them to know that they can come to us for support. And so sometimes it's asking those questions that can be helpful to kids. And if you're interested in those conversation cards, if you go to the resources and sign up, I'll make sure that those are sent to you as well, because I think they're really great and helpful.
Oh, great. Yeah, the fresh slate of a new school year, really can't be underestimated. And it is a trick. Like you said it earlier very well, that defiers are never going to respond positively to you just telling them what to do. And so that's what made me think of it as how to get their buy-in.
Yes.
So another type of challenge we see quite a bit, and whether it's because your child is a worrier or maybe a perfectionist, is a challenge with task initiation. So someone here said that they've had some luck getting their child to, break down projects into smaller steps and even put them on a calendar. Huge. But when it comes to actually beginning the task, they struggle to get started. And then the parent, of course, feels like a nag. Any advice for folks in that scenario?
Yeah. Well, certainly you want to make sure that if the child writes something on their calendar, first of all, that's amazing and congratulations. Like that's a big deal. And even if it's not in their calendar, I was talking to a student the other day. He's like, I hate calendars. I like to do a list every day. I'm like, great, a list, just need a way to write it down. He's like, and sometimes if I don't want to do a list, then I will put sticky notes on my laptop. I'm like, that's awesome. But so we want to make sure that what they have on their list isn't like, study for 2 hours. It has to be super small. So here's a couple of questions that you can ask your child. You can say, what's the smallest thing you could do to get started? What would be the very first step to get you going? You can even do that concept I called body doubling, which is, hey, do you want to work on that for 20 minutes? Because I have to write out I have to do a bunch of emails. We could kind of like work on it at the same time. And that's kind of like a form of accountability that can also be helpful.
Oops, sorry about that. Wonderful. Okay. Another thing we're seeing is one parent wrote in to say, and you kind of just touched on this. We talked about the rocks and the pebbles and the sand. A couple people said their child prefers to start with the pebbles to build up their confidence, get something small done, and kind of build that momentum in self-esteem and achievement. Anything wrong with that approach if it works for your child?
Not at all. If your child starts with pebbles, as long as they get the rocks done, often what happens is the rocks, because they feel, the most taxing, those are always left for late at night at the end. And that's why, putting them towards the beginning is helpful. But yeah, you can totally start with the pebbles. That's awesome. Just getting started. Maybe a pebble, then a rock, then a pebble, like all that stuff works.
Yeah. And a couple of people here have said that their schools don't offer, or it just doesn't work for their child, the online portal. And they are really wanting to know about best practices for getting a system for writing down assignments that their child can sort of independently use and take over, which would address another challenge, which is leaving essential materials at school. Mm-hmm. Any tips for the planner?
Yeah, I might ask, I'm not sure of the grade level of these students, but often when there's no LMS, the student is at a younger grade. So it could be a conversation with the teacher using the words "I've noticed," not like, hey, you need to make sure my child writes this down, but instead like, I've noticed my child comes home without anything written down. And I'm wondering, do you have a strategy around that? Is there anything that could be done during the school day? What do you think? And putting it like that. When I was a teacher, I had a blown up copy of the students. This was years ago. So a copy of the assignment notebook, and I had it on the board. And so at the end of the day, I would say, okay, this was the homework we talked about for social studies. What do you need to take home? But I had that skill set, and not every teacher understands that kids need that. So even if they're not going to go, even if they won't write it down, you could still ask, what's a good way for my child? And that way you're making alliances with the teacher, because she can be, or he can be, a valuable asset in helping you to make sure the work gets done.
Okay, fantastic. That is very helpful. And let's see here. I want to throw in one last question about timing, timing for homework. So I'm going to focus this on a middle school student who comes home after a long day of school and is exhausted and needs some time to decompress. Now it's transition time to homework, and a battle ensues. Tips for parents to help smooth that transition?
Well, I might think about, what is the student doing from when they get home to starting homework? Because if it's like a really high dopamine activity, meaning it's almost like addicting, like video games or social media or something like that, it might be really hard to pull the child away from that. So it could be that you say, sure, no problem, you can start in an hour, but during this time, what if you played outside, or, you worked on this puzzle, or you did something else that's not what's hard to pull them away from. Often that is what's happened. So I think kids do need downtime. We go through this cycle of energy, and it tends to dip after school at around 3 o'clock. So you could keep with that, like give them that break. You could also try shortening the break and see if that's more successful, but definitely changing what they do during the break.
Well, unfortunately, that had to be our last question as we have run out of time. But Anne, thank you once again for joining ADDitude for this webinar and for contributing all of these really practical and helpful strategies to our ADHD community.
Thank you so much for having me, Annie.
Always a pleasure. And thanks to today's listeners too. If you would like to access the event resources for this webinar, just visit ADDitudemag.com. You can search for podcast 517. The slides and recording are posted just a couple hours after we wrap up the live webinar. If you are listening in replay mode, you just simply click on the episode description. And also, please know that our full library of ADDitude webinars is available as a podcast. It's called the ADHD Experts podcast, and you can find it on most streaming platforms. We hope to see everyone again. Next week, we will be joined by Dr. Maggie Sibley, who will be discussing how ADHD symptoms evolve and fluctuate across the lifespan. So to make sure you don't miss that or any other ADDitude webinars or resources, you can sign up for alerts at additudemag.com/newsletters. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Anne, so much. Good luck this back to school season.